There is a man sitting under a tree. He has been sitting there for days, refusing to move until he understands something. Not something abstract, not something theoretical, something immediate, something that will not let him go. The question is simple. The question is unbearable. The question is this: why is suffering? Not why do bad things happen, not why is life unfair, but why is suffering woven into the fabric of existence itself? Why does everything you love eventually disappoint, or leave, or die? Why does every pleasure contain the seed of its own ending? Why does the human heart, no matter how much it gets, always want more? Why is there this constant ache, this sense that something is wrong, that something is missing, that you are not quite where you belong? The man under the tree is 35 years old. His name is Siddhartha Gautama. He was born a prince. He grew up in a palace designed to shield him from every form of suffering. His father built him 3 palaces, one for each season. He was surrounded by beautiful people, beautiful objects, beautiful experiences. He married. He had a son. He had everything a human being is supposed to want, and still the question haunted him: why is there suffering? Not out there in the world of poverty and disease and death, but here, inside, in the palace, in the marriage, in the life that looked perfect from the outside, but felt hollow from the inside. There is a famous story about what broke him open. The story says he left the palace 4 times, and each time saw something his father had tried to hide from him. The first time he saw an old man, bent and fragile, barely able to walk, and Siddhartha asked his charioteer what happened to him. And the charioteer said, "Nothing happened to him. This is what happens to everyone. This is what will happen to you." The second time he saw a sick person writhing in pain. The third time he saw a corpse being carried to the cremation ground, and each time the same realization: this is not an accident, this is not a mistake, this is the structure of being human. And then, the 4th time, he saw a wandering ascetic, a renunciant, someone who had left everything behind to search for the answer to the same question Siddhartha was asking. And something in Siddhartha recognized something in that person, a commitment, a seriousness, a willingness to pay the price to know the truth. So he left. In the middle of the night, he walked out of the palace. He left his wife sleeping. He left his newborn son. He left the kingdom he was supposed to inherit. And he went to find teachers, to practice austerities, to do whatever it took to understand why there is suffering and whether there is a way out. This is not a story about a spiritual seeker finding peace. This is a story about a man who could not bear the lie anymore. The lie that if you just arrange your life correctly, if you just get the right things, the right relationships, the right experiences, you will finally be satisfied. Siddhartha had all of that, and it did not work. And so he left to find out why. For 6 years, he practiced extreme asceticism. He fasted until his bones showed through his skin. He meditated until he could barely move. He pushed his body and mind to the edge of death because he believed that suffering came from the body, from desire, from attachment to physical existence. And if he could transcend the body, if he could kill desire, he would be free. But it did not work. The suffering did not end. It just changed form. And so, after 6 years, starving and exhausted, he sat down under a tree and decided he would not move until he understood. Not through belief, not through discipline, not through hope, but through direct seeing, through looking at the mind itself and understanding how suffering is created. And this is where the story becomes philosophy. Because what Buddha discovered under that tree was not a theological answer. It was a psychological one. He did not find God. He did not find a soul. He did not find a metaphysical explanation for why the world is the way it is. He found a mechanism. He found the process by which the mind creates suffering. And once he saw the process, he saw how to stop it. This is why Buddha is not primarily a religious figure. He is a psychologist. 2,500 years before Freud, before cognitive science, before neuroscience, Buddha mapped the interior landscape of the human mind with precision and clarity that still holds up today. He did not ask you to believe anything. He asked you to look, to observe, to see for yourself whether what he was saying was true. And what he saw was this: suffering is not caused by external circumstances. Suffering is caused by the way the mind relates to experience. By craving, by clinging, by the constant attempt to make impermanent things permanent, to make conditioned things unconditioned, to make the self into something solid when it is actually a process. The question under the tree was, why is there suffering? The answer Buddha found was because you are constantly trying to become something you are not, because you are at war with impermanence, because you believe there is a self that needs to be protected, improved, satisfied. And that belief, that identification with a separate self, is the root of all suffering. This is not comforting. This is not reassuring. This is terrifying. Because if the self is the problem, then the solution is not to improve the self. The solution is to see through the self, to recognize that the thing you have been defending your entire life, the thing you think you are, is a fiction. A useful fiction, a necessary fiction, but a fiction nonetheless. And when you see through it, when you stop identifying with it, something shifts. The suffering does not end because your life gets better. The suffering ends because the one who was suffering is seen to be unreal. Buddha spent the rest of his life trying to communicate this insight, not as a belief system, not as a religion, but as a set of tools, a method of investigation, a way of looking at your own mind that allows you to see what he saw. And the core of that teaching is contained in what he called the Four Noble Truths. Not four beliefs, not four commandments, four observations about the structure of human experience. The first noble truth is this: life is dukkha. This word is usually translated as suffering, but that is not quite right. Dukkha is more subtle. It is the sense that something is off, that something is unsatisfactory, that no matter what you have, no matter what you achieve, there is always a crack in it, a dissatisfaction, a longing for something else. Even pleasure contains dukkha, because pleasure is impermanent and the mind knows it. Even in the middle of joy, there is the shadow of its ending. Even in the middle of love, there is the fear of loss. This is dukkha. Not constant misery, but constant unsatisfactoriness, the inability of conditioned existence to ever fully satisfy the mind's craving for permanence and completion. The second noble truth is this: the cause of dukkha is tanha, craving, thirst, the mind's constant reaching for what it does not have and pushing away what it does not want. Buddha identified three types of craving: the craving for sense pleasure, the craving for existence, for becoming, for being someone, and the craving for non-existence, for escape, for annihilation. All three are forms of the same movement, the mind refusing to be where it is, constantly trying to be somewhere else, someone else, something else. The third noble truth is this: cessation is possible, nirvana. The extinction of craving. Not the extinction of life, but the extinction of the constant wanting that drives life. And when craving ceases, suffering ceases. Not because circumstances change, but because the mechanism that creates suffering has stopped operating. The fourth noble truth is this: there is a path, a method, a training, the eightfold path. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. Not right as in morally correct, but right as in aligned, accurate, skillful. The path is not about becoming a good person. The path is about seeing clearly. And when you see clearly, you act differently. Not because you should, but because delusion has been replaced by understanding. This is the framework. This is what Buddha discovered under the tree. Not a theology, not a metaphysics, a psychology. A diagnosis of the human condition and a prescription for how to address it. And the rest of his teaching is an elaboration of these four truths, an exploration of how the mind works, how suffering is created, and how it can end. But here is what makes this dangerous. Here is what makes this radical. Buddha is not saying you need to fix yourself. He is saying you need to see through yourself. He is not saying you need to become enlightened. He is saying you need to recognize that the one who wants to become enlightened is the problem. The self is not something to be improved. The self is something to be seen through. And when you see through it, when you recognize that there is no permanent, unchanging self, then the entire structure of suffering collapses. This is why Buddha's teaching is so difficult to accept, because it is not offering you what you want. It is not offering you a better self, a happier self, a more successful self. It is offering you the end of self, and the mind does not want that. The mind wants to become something. The mind wants to improve. The mind wants to feel like it is progressing, achieving, getting somewhere. And Buddha is saying that movement, that becoming, is the problem. That the peace you are seeking is not at the end of the path, it is in the cessation of the path, in the letting go of the constant effort to be anything at all. So the question under the tree was, why is there suffering? And the answer is, because you are trying to become. Because you believe there is a self that needs to be somewhere other than where it is. And the solution is not to get that self where it wants to go. The solution is to see that the self is a process, not a thing. That it is constantly changing, constantly constructed, constantly dissolving. And when you see that, when you stop identifying with it, the suffering ends. Not because you have become someone who does not suffer, but because the one who was suffering has been seen through. This is the beginning. This is the ground. This is what Buddha saw under the tree. And everything else he taught for the next 45 years was an attempt to help people see it too. There is a man who has been shot with an arrow. The arrow is in his chest. It is poisoned. He is dying. But before he will let anyone remove the arrow, he has questions. He wants to know who shot the arrow. He wants to know what kind of wood the arrow is made from. He wants to know what family the person who shot the arrow came from. He wants to know the name of the poison. He wants to know the direction the arrow came from. He wants to know why he was shot. And while he is asking these questions, while he is demanding answers, he dies. The arrow stays in his chest, the poison spreads, and he dies not because there was no cure, but because he was asking the wrong questions. Buddha told this story to a monk named Malunkyaputta, who kept asking metaphysical questions. Is the universe eternal or not eternal? Is the universe finite or infinite? Does the enlightened person exist after death or not exist after death? Is the self the same as the body or different from the body? Buddha refused to answer these questions, not because he did not have answers, not because the questions were unimportant, but because they were not useful. They were not addressing the actual problem. The problem is not that you do not understand the metaphysics of existence. The problem is that you are suffering, right now, in this moment. And metaphysical speculation does not end suffering. only seeing clearly how suffering is created and suffering. This is one of the most radical moves in the history of philosophy. Buddha refused to play the metaphysical game. He refused to give definitive answers about the nature of ultimate reality, the existence of God, the structure of the cosmos. Not because he was agnostic, not because he did not care, but because he understood that those questions are distractions. They are what the mind does to avoid looking at itself. They are the poisoned arrow questions, and as long as you are asking them, you are not addressing the wound. What Buddha offered instead was a phenomenological approach. Do not speculate about what is ultimately real. Look at what is actually happening in your experience right now. What is suffering? How does it arise? What is its cause? Can it cease? How? These are not metaphysical questions. These are empirical questions, and they can be answered through direct observation of your own mind. This is why Buddha's teaching is sometimes called the middle way. Not middle in the sense of compromise or moderation, middle in the sense of avoiding two extremes. The extreme of metaphysical speculation, the belief that if you just get the right theory, the right beliefs, you will be free. And the extreme of nihilism, the belief that nothing matters, that there is no truth, that you might as well give up. Buddha is saying both are wrong. The truth is not found in theories. The truth is found in direct seeing. And when you see clearly, you discover that there is a path out of suffering. Not through belief, not through hope, but through understanding. There is another story about a monk who came to Buddha and said, "I want to know about the afterlife. I want to know what happens when I die. I want to know if there is a soul, if there is reincarnation, if there is heaven or hell." And Buddha said, "Have you ever eaten lunch?" And the monk said, "Yes, of course." And Buddha said, "Did you spend the morning worrying about whether lunch exists? Did you spend the morning debating the metaphysics of lunch? Or did you just eat when you were hungry?" And the monk said, "I just ate." And Buddha said, "That is how you should approach these questions. When you are enlightened, you will know what you need to know. Right now you are hungry, so eat. Right now you are suffering, so address the suffering. Stop asking questions that cannot be answered and start asking questions that can." This is not anti-intellectual. This is not a rejection of philosophy. This is a reorientation of philosophy. Buddha is saying philosophy is not about constructing elaborate theories about reality. Philosophy is about investigating your own experience with precision and honesty. It is about looking at the mind and seeing how it creates suffering. And once you see that, once you understand the mechanism, you can stop doing it. Not through effort, not through willpower, but through understanding. The way you stop touching a hot stove is not through discipline, it is through seeing that the stove is hot. Buddha's approach is radically empirical. He is not asking you to believe anything on authority. He is asking you to test it. He famously told his followers, "Do not believe something just because I said it. Do not believe something just because it is written in Scripture. Do not believe something just because it is traditional. Believe it only when you have tested it in your own experience and found it to be true." This is not faith. This is investigation. Buddha is offering you a hypothesis about how the mind works, and he is asking you to run the experiment yourself. The hypothesis is this: suffering arises from craving and clinging. Craving arises from ignorance. Ignorance of what? Ignorance of the three marks of existence: impermanence, suffering, and no self. Everything is impermanent. Everything that arises passes away, no exceptions. Everything conditioned contains suffering, contains unsatisfactoriness, because it is subject to change and the mind wants it to be permanent. And there is no permanent, unchanging self. There is a process of identification, a stream of consciousness, a continuity of experience, but there is no solid, independent self that exists apart from that process. These are not beliefs, these are observations. Buddha is saying if you look closely at your experience, you will see that these three things are always true. Nothing lasts, nothing fully satisfies, there is no unchanging self. And if you really see this, if you see it not just intellectually, but in your direct experience, the mind stops clinging. Because why would you cling to something you know is impermanent? Why would you try to find permanent satisfaction in something you know cannot provide it? Why would you identify with a self you know is constantly changing? This is the poisoned arrow teaching. Stop asking metaphysical questions. Stop trying to figure out the ultimate nature of reality. Pull the arrow out, look at the mechanism of suffering, see how it works, and when you see it clearly, it stops working. Not because you made it stop, but because ignorance has been replaced by understanding. There is one more layer to this. Buddha's refusal to answer metaphysical questions is not just practical, it is also philosophical. Because Buddha understood that language cannot capture ultimate reality. Words are concepts. Concepts are constructed. They divide experience into categories, self and other, inside and outside, existence and non-existence. But reality is prior to those divisions. Reality is what is left when you stop dividing it up. And so any answer Buddha gave to a metaphysical question would be false. Not false in the sense of incorrect, false in the sense of reifying, of making solid, something that is actually fluid. When Milinda asked, "Does the enlightened person exist after death or not exist after death?" Buddha refused to answer because both options assume there is an entity, a thing that either exists or does not exist. But Buddha's teaching is that there is no such entity. There is a process. This is the poisoned arrow teaching. Stop asking metaphysical questions. Stop trying to figure out the ultimate nature of reality. Pull the arrow out, look at the mechanism of suffering, see how it works, and when you see it clearly, it stops working. Not because you made it stop, but because ignorance has been replaced by understanding. There is one more layer to this. Buddha's refusal to answer metaphysical questions is not just practical, it is also philosophical. Because Buddha understood that language cannot capture ultimate reality. Words are concepts. Concepts are constructed. They divide experience into categories, self and other, inside and outside, existence and non-existence. But reality is prior to those divisions. Reality is what is left when you stop dividing it up. And so any answer Buddha gave to a metaphysical question would be false. Not false in the sense of incorrect, false in the sense of reifying, of making solid, something that is actually fluid. When Milinda asked, "Does the enlightened person exist after death or not exist after death?" Buddha refused to answer because both options assume there is an entity, a thing that either exists or does not exist. But Buddha's teaching is that there is no such entity. There is a process. There is a flow of consciousness, but there is no permanent self that transmigrates from one life to another or that dissolves into nothingness. Both answers assume the thing being asked about is real, and Buddha is saying it is not. The question is based on a false premise, so the answer is silence. This is profound. Buddha is not giving you answers. He is taking away the questions. He is showing you that the questions themselves are the problem, that the mind's need to know, to categorize, to pin down reality and concepts is part of the mechanism of suffering. Because when you conceptualize reality, you separate yourself from it. You create a subject and an object. You create a self and a world. And as long as that division exists, you are in dukkha. You are in the position of someone standing outside reality, trying to understand it, trying to control it, trying to make it conform to your desires. And that position is suffering. The solution is not better answers. The solution is the collapse of the question. The solution is direct experience prior to conceptualization. This is what meditation is for. Not to relax, not to feel better, but to observe the mind closely enough that you can see how it constructs the self and the world moment by moment. And when you see that construction happening, when you catch the mind in the act of dividing reality, something shifts. The construction becomes transparent, and what is left is just this. Just experience, without a self experiencing it, without an object being experienced, just the flow of phenomena arising and passing away. This is why Buddha told the story of the poisoned arrow, because he knew that people would rather ask questions than pull the arrow out. They would rather speculate than investigate. They would rather believe than see. And he is saying, stop. You are dying. The arrow is in your chest. Pull it out. Look at your own mind. See how suffering is created. And when you see it, you will be free. Not because you will have the right beliefs, but because you will have seen through the mechanism that creates suffering in the first place. There is a woman named Kisa Gotami. Her baby dies. She cannot accept it. She carries the dead child from house to house, asking for medicine, asking for someone to bring the child back to life. People tell her the child is dead. She does not listen. She keeps searching. Finally, someone tells her to go to the Buddha. Maybe he can help. So she goes to him holding her dead child, and she says, "Please, give me medicine. Bring my child back." And Buddha does not say the child is dead. He does not try to comfort her. He does not give her a teaching about impermanence or letting go. Instead, he says, "I will help you, but first you must bring me a mustard seed from a house that has never known death." And Kisa Gotami lights up. A mustard seed, that is easy. Every house has mustard seeds. She will find one and bring it back, and the Buddha will save her child. So she goes door to door. She knocks on the first house and says, "Can you give me a mustard seed?" And they say, "Of course." And she says, "But it must be from a house that has never known death." And they say, "We cannot help you. My father died last year." She goes to the next house. The same thing. "My sister died." The next house. "My husband died." The next house. "My child died." She goes to every house in the village. Every house has mustard seeds, but every house has known death. And slowly, as she walks from door to door, something shifts in her. She begins to see that her suffering is not unique, that every person she meets is carrying the same wound, that death is not an exception, it is the rule, that impermanence is not a mistake in the system, it is the system. And when she returns to the Buddha, she does not ask for medicine anymore. She asks for teaching, because she has seen something. She has seen that the problem is not that her child died. The problem is that she believed death could be avoided, that she believed life could be permanent, that she believed she could hold on to what she loved forever. And that belief, that clinging to permanence in a world of impermanence, is what created her unbearable suffering. Buddha did not need to explain impermanence to her. He showed her. He sent her out into the world to discover for herself what he could have told her in a single sentence, but what she would not have been able to hear. That everything that arises passes away. That loss is not an aberration, it is woven into the structure of existence. That the first noble truth, life is dukkha, is not pessimism, it is realism. This is what dukkha means. It is usually translated as suffering, and that translation is not wrong, but it misses something. Dukkha is more pervasive than suffering. Dukkha is the background hum of dissatisfaction that runs through all conditioned existence. It is the sense that something is off, that something is not quite right, even when everything seems fine. It is the crack in everything, as Leonard Cohen said. The crack that lets the light in, but also the crack that means nothing is ever complete, nothing is ever whole, nothing is ever permanent. Buddha identified 3 types of dukkha. The first is the dukkha of pain, physical pain, emotional pain, the obvious suffering that everyone recognizes, sickness, old age, death, the loss of what you love, the presence of what you hate. This is dukkha in its most undeniable form. No one can escape it. Kisa Gotami could not escape it. You cannot escape it. The body breaks down. Relationships end. People die. This is not pessimism. This is observation. The second type of dukkha is the dukkha of change. This is more subtle. This is the suffering that is hidden inside pleasure, because every pleasure is impermanent. Every moment of joy contains the seed of its own ending. You are happy, and even in the happiness there is the knowledge that it will not last. You are with someone you love, and even in the love there is the shadow of separation. You achieve something, and even in the achievement there is the question of what comes next. This is why even people who have everything, even people whose lives look perfect from the outside, still feel dukkha. Because pleasure does not satisfy. It points toward satisfaction, it promises satisfaction, but it cannot deliver, because it is impermanent, and the mind knows it. The third type of dukkha is the most subtle and the most pervasive. It is the dukkha of conditioned existence itself. The fact that you are a process, not a thing, that you are constantly changing, constantly becoming, constantly in flux. That there is no solid ground, no permanent self, no place to rest. This is the existential vertigo at the heart of being human. You are a verb pretending to be a noun. You are a river insisting it is a rock. And that insistence, that attempt to make yourself solid when you are actually fluid, is dukkha. This is what Buddha saw under the tree. Not that life is terrible, not that you should give up or despair, but that the structure of conditioned existence is unsatisfactory. That everything you experience is marked by 3 characteristics: impermanence, suffering, and no self. And if you do not see these characteristics clearly, if you keep pretending that things are permanent, that pleasure will satisfy, that there is a solid self to protect and improve, then you will suffer. Not because you are doing something wrong, but because you are out of alignment with reality. There is a teaching Buddha gave called the second arrow. He said, when you are hit by an arrow, that is the first arrow. That is pain. That is unavoidable. You cannot live in a body without experiencing physical pain. You cannot love without experiencing loss. You cannot be human without being touched by the first arrow. But then there's the second arrow. The second arrow is your reaction to the first arrow. The second arrow is the story you tell about the pain, the resistance, the why me, the this should not be happening, the if only I had done something different. The second arrow is the suffering you create on top of the pain. Buddha is not saying you can avoid the first arrow. He is saying you can avoid the second arrow. You can experience pain without suffering. You can lose what you love without collapsing into despair. You can face death without terror. Not because you have become numb or detached, but because you have stopped fighting reality. You have stopped insisting that things should be different from what they are. You have stopped shooting yourself with the second arrow. This is what Kisa Gotami learned. The death of her child was the first arrow. Unbearable, yes. But the second arrow was her refusal to accept it, her insistence that death should not have happened, her belief that she should have been exempt. And Buddha sent her out to discover that death happens to everyone, that loss is universal, that the first arrow is unavoidable. And when she saw that, when she stopped resisting, the second arrow fell away. The pain remained, but the suffering changed, because she was no longer at war with reality. This is the psychological genius of Buddhist teaching. He is not telling you to avoid pain. He is showing you how you create suffering on top of pain through your relationship to it, through your craving for things to be different, through your aversion to what is, through your ignorance of impermanence. And if you can change that relationship, if you can see clearly that everything is impermanent and that clinging to the impermanent is what creates suffering, then the suffering can end. Not the pain, but the suffering. There is another story. A monk comes to Buddha and says, "I have been meditating for years. I have been following the path, but I am still suffering. I still feel anxiety. I still feel fear. I still feel desire. When will this end?" And Buddha picks up a musical instrument, a kind of lute, and he says, "If the strings are too tight, what happens?" And the monk says, "The strings will break." And Buddha says, "And if the strings are too loose?" And the monk says, "There will be no sound." And Buddha says, "So how should the strings be?" And the monk says, "Not too tight, not too loose, just right." And Buddha says, that is how you should be with your practice, not straining, not giving up, but finding the middle way. This is the middle way, not the middle in the sense of compromise, the middle in the sense of balance. Buddha tried extreme asceticism. He starved himself. He tortured his body. He thought that if he could kill desire, he would be free. But it did not work. The body broke down, the mind became dull, and the suffering continued. Then he tried the opposite. He ate, he rested, he stopped torturing himself. And in that balance, in that middle ground between indulgence and denial, he found clarity. He found the capacity to see clearly without the distortion of extreme craving or extreme aversion. This is what Buddha is offering. Not a life of denial, not a life of indulgence, but a life of clear seeing, a life where you are not at war with your experience, a life where you can feel pain without adding suffering to it, a life where you can experience pleasure without clinging to it, a life where you can face impermanence without terror. And that life is not achieved through effort. It is achieved through understanding, through seeing the three marks of existence so clearly that the mind stops fighting them. Dukkha is not the enemy. Dukkha is the teacher. It is the signal that you are out of alignment, that you are clinging to something impermanent, that you are identifying with a self that does not exist, that you are at war with the way things are. And when you see that, when you really see it, the war ends, not because you have won, but because you have seen that the war itself was the problem, that the enemy you were fighting was a phantom, that the self you were trying to protect was never solid to begin with. And in that seeing, there is peace. Not the peace of getting what you want, but the peace of no longer being at war with what is. There is a dialogue in the Buddhist texts between a monk and a king. The king's name is Milinda. The monk's name is Nagasena. The king is troubled by Buddha's teaching of no self, anatta. He cannot understand it. He cannot accept it. So he asks Nagasena, "If there is no self, then who is speaking to me right now? Who is this person I am talking to?" And Nagasena says, "Your Majesty, how did you arrive here today?" And the king says, "I came in my chariot." And Nagasena says, "Show me the chariot." The king points to the chariot outside, and Nagasena says, "Is the chariot the wheels?" And the king says, "No." "Is the chariot the axle?" "No." "Is the chariot the frame?" "No." "Is the chariot the reins?" "No." Nagasena goes through every part of the chariot, the wheels, the axle, the frame, the seat, the reins, the yoke. None of them individually is the chariot, and when you take all the parts apart, there is no chariot left over. There is no chariot essence that exists independently of the parts. The chariot is a name, a concept, a useful designation for a collection of parts assembled in a particular way, but it is not a thing. It is a process. It is a configuration. And Nagasena says, it is the same with the self. You ask me who is speaking, but there is no speaker apart from the speaking. There is no self apart from the process of thinking, feeling, perceiving, acting. There are the 5 aggregates: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness. There is the stream of experience, but there is no permanent, unchanging self that owns that experience. The self is like the chariot. It is a useful designation, but it is not a thing. This is anatta, no self, and it is the most dangerous idea in Buddha's teaching, because everything in you resists it. Everything in you insists that there is a self, that you are someone, that you have an identity, that there is a continuous you that has existed from birth until now and will continue to exist until death. And Buddha is saying that is an illusion, a powerful illusion, a necessary illusion for functioning in the world, but an illusion nonetheless. Buddha broke the self down into 5 aggregates, 5 categories of experience. The first is form, the body, the physical organism. The second is feeling, the basic pleasantness or unpleasantness of experience. The third is perception, the recognition and labeling of things. The fourth is mental formations, the habits, the patterns, the tendencies, the conditioning that shapes how you respond. The fifth is consciousness, the basic awareness of experience. These 5 aggregates are constantly changing, constantly arising and passing away. And when you look for the self, when you try to find something permanent and unchanging, you cannot, because there is nothing there. There is a teaching Buddha gave called the Discourse on Not Self. He asked his monks, is form permanent or impermanent? They said, impermanent. And if it is impermanent, is it satisfactory or unsatisfactory? Unsatisfactory. And if it is impermanent and unsatisfactory, is it fitting to regard it as this is mine, this is me, this is myself? No. He went through all 5 aggregates: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness. All of them impermanent, all of them unsatisfactory, none of them the self. And he said, therefore, monks, any form, any feeling, any perception, any mental formation, any consciousness, whether past, present, or future, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, all should be seen as it really is with correct wisdom. This is not mine, this is not me, this is not myself. This is not a belief, this is an instruction. Buddha is telling you to look, to investigate, to see whether you can find a permanent, unchanging self anywhere in your experience. And if you look honestly, you cannot. What you find is a process, a stream of thoughts, feelings, sensations, perceptions, a flow of experience, but no experiencer, no solid, independent self that stands apart from the experience and owns it. This is terrifying, because the self is what you have been defending your entire life. The self is what you think you are. And Buddha is saying it does not exist, not in the way you think it does. There is continuity. There is memory. There is a sense of being the same person over time. But that is not the same as a permanent, unchanging self. That is narrative. That is memory, linking moments together and creating the illusion of continuity. But the moments themselves are constantly changing. The person you were 10 years ago is not the person you are now. The person you were this morning is not the person you are now. Every cell in your body has changed. Every thought you had has arisen and passed away. Every emotion you felt has come and gone. Where is the permanent self in all of that? There is a monk who goes to Buddha and says, if there is no self, then who is it that experiences the results of karma? Who is it that is reborn? If I do something now and there is no permanent self, then who experiences the consequences? And Buddha tells him the story of a mango tree. You plant a mango seed. Years later, a tree grows. The tree produces fruit. Is the fruit the same as the seed? No. The seed is gone. It has decomposed. It no longer exists. But is the fruit completely unrelated to the seed? No. The fruit arose because of the seed. There is a causal connection, but there is no substance that traveled from the seed to the fruit. There is only a process of dependent arising. It is the same with the self. There is no substance that travels from moment to moment. There is no soul, no essence, no permanent entity. But there is a causal chain. This moment arises because of the previous moment. Your experience now is conditioned by your experience in the past. Your actions now will condition your experience in the future. There is karma. There is causality. There is continuity. But there is no permanent self that owns that continuity. There is only the process itself. This is what Buddha means by dependent origination, pratitya samutpada. Everything arises in dependence on causes and conditions. Nothing exists independently. Nothing has inherent, permanent existence. Everything is a process, a flow, a constant becoming. And the self is no exception. The self is not a thing. The self is an activity. It is the activity of identifying, of claiming ownership, of saying, this is mine, this is me. And that activity creates suffering, because it is trying to make something solid out of something fluid. It is trying to find permanence in a world of impermanence. There is another story. A man is walking at night and he sees a snake on the path. He jumps back in terror. His heart races. He is filled with fear. But then he looks more closely and realizes it is not a snake, it is a rope, and the fear vanishes. Not because the fear was not real. The fear was real. The bodily response was real. But the object of the fear was not. He was afraid of something that did not exist. He projected snake onto the rope, and that projection created the fear. Buddha is saying you do the same thing with the self. You project a permanent, independent self onto the flow of experience, and that projection creates suffering. Because you are constantly trying to protect something that does not exist. You are constantly trying to improve something that is not there. You are constantly trying to satisfy something that cannot be satisfied because it is not real. And when you see through the projection, when you see that the self is like the snake, an illusion created by misperception, the suffering falls away. Not because you have killed the self, but because you have seen that it was never there to begin with. This is why anatta is so dangerous, because it is not asking you to improve the self, it is asking you to see through the self, and the self does not want that. The self, or rather the pattern of identification that we call the self, will do everything it can to avoid that seeing. It will distract you. It will create new projects, new goals, new things to become. It will even turn the spiritual path into a project of self-improvement. It will say, I will become enlightened. I will become awakened. I will become someone who has no self. And Buddha is saying that is still the self. That is still the pattern of identification. That is still becoming. And becoming is the problem. The solution is not to become something else. The solution is to see that there is no one to become anything. That the self is a process, not a thing. That it is constantly changing, constantly constructed, constantly dissolving. And when you see that, when you really see it, not just as an idea, but as a direct perception, something shifts. The clinging stops. The defending stops. The constant effort to be someone, to protect someone, to improve someone stops. Not because you made it stop, but because the one who was doing it has been seen to be unreal. This is the heart of Buddhist teaching. This is what makes it so radical. He is not offering you a better self. He is offering you freedom from the self. And that freedom is not in the future. It is not something you achieve after years of practice. It is available now, in this moment. If you are willing to look, if you are willing to see that the self you have been defending, the self you think you are, is a construction, a useful fiction, but a fiction nonetheless. And when you see through the fiction, what remains is not nothing.
What remains is the process itself, the flow of experience, consciousness without an owner, life without a liver, being without someone to be. This is what Buddha discovered under the tree, and this is what he spent the rest of his life trying to show people, not to believe, but to see for themselves. There is a teaching in the Buddhist texts called the Wheel of Dependent Origination. It is a map of how suffering is created, moment by moment, link by link. It starts with ignorance. Ignorance of the three marks of existence: impermanence, suffering, no self. Because of ignorance, there are mental formations, habitual patterns of response. Because of mental formations, there is consciousness. Because of consciousness, there is name and form, the sense of a self and a world. Because of name and form, there are the 6 sense spaces. Because of the 6 sense spaces, there is contact. Because of contact, there is feeling. Because of feeling, there is craving. Because of craving, there is clinging. Because of clinging, there is becoming. Because of becoming, there is birth. Because of birth, there is aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair.
This is the chain. This is how suffering arises. Not randomly, not because the universe is cruel, but because of a process, a mechanism that operates according to causes and conditions. And Buddha is saying, if you can see the mechanism, you can interrupt it. If you can see how suffering is created, you can stop creating it. The key link in the chain is tanha, craving, thirst, the mind's constant reaching for what it wants and pushing away what it does not want. This is not the same as desire in general. Tanha is a specific kind of desire. It is the desire that comes from feeling like something is missing, the desire that comes from the belief that if you can just get that thing, have that experience, become that person, you will finally be satisfied. It is the desire that arises from the sense of incompleteness, from the belief that you are not enough as you are. Buddha identified 3 types of tanha. The first is kama tanha, craving for sense pleasures, food, sex, comfort, entertainment, the mind constantly seeking pleasant sensations and avoiding unpleasant ones. This is the most obvious form of craving. Everyone recognizes it. But Buddha is not saying sense pleasure is bad. He is saying the craving for it creates suffering, because sense pleasure is impermanent. It arises and passes away, and when it passes away, the mind wants more. It is never satisfied. It is always reaching for the next thing, the next hit, the next moment of pleasure. And that reaching, that constant dissatisfaction, is suffering. The second type is bhava tanha, craving for existence, for becoming, for being someone. This is more subtle. This is the desire to be seen, to be recognized, to be important, to matter. It is the desire for status, for achievement, for accomplishment. It is the desire to build a self, to have an identity, to be someone special. And this craving is even more insidious than the craving for sense pleasure, because it is often disguised as virtue. It presents itself as ambition, as growth, as self-improvement. But underneath, it is the same mechanism, the belief that you are not enough as you are, the belief that you need to become something else to be worthy, to be happy, to be free. The third type is vibhava tanha, craving for non-existence, for annihilation, for escape. This is the desire to disappear, to not have to deal with the difficulty of being alive. It shows up as depression, as numbness, as the wish to just stop existing. And it also shows up in more subtle ways, in the desire to lose yourself in distraction, in entertainment, in busyness, in the desire to not feel what you are feeling, to not face what you are facing, to not be present to the difficulty of your own experience. All three types of craving are forms of the same movement. The mind refusing to be where it is. The mind insisting that this moment, as it is not enough. The mind constantly trying to be somewhere else, someone else, something else. And that movement, that constant becoming, is the engine of samsara. Samsara is not a place. Samsara is a process. It is the process of constantly trying to become, constantly trying to satisfy the unsatisfiable, constantly chasing after what is impermanent and then suffering when it slips away. There is a story about a dog chasing its own tail. The dog sees the tail, it wants the tail, it runs in circles trying to catch the tail. But the faster it runs, the faster the tail moves. It never catches it. It exhausts itself, and still the tail is there, just out of reach. This is tanha. This is craving. The mind chasing after satisfaction, after completion, after the moment when it can finally rest. But that moment never comes, because the mind is chasing itself. It is trying to satisfy a desire that is generated by the very act of desiring. The desire creates the sense of lack, and then the desire promises to fill the lack, but it cannot, because the lack is not real. It is created by the desire itself.
Buddha is saying the problem is not that you have desires. The problem is that you believe the desires. You believe that if you can just satisfy this desire, you will be happy. If you can just get that thing, achieve that goal, become that person, the craving will end. But it does not end. It just shifts to the next thing. Because the craving is not about the object. The craving is about the mechanism of believing that something outside you, something other than what you are right now, will complete you. There is a monk who asks Buddha, "How do I stop craving?" And Buddha says, "You do not stop craving, you see craving, you observe it, you watch how it arises, how it operates, how it creates suffering. And in that seeing, something shifts. Craving does not stop because you made it stop. Craving stops because the ignorance that fuels it has been replaced by understanding." This is crucial. Buddha is not teaching suppression. He is not teaching denial. He is not saying you should never want anything, never desire anything, never enjoy anything. He is teaching understanding. He is saying, look at craving, see how it works, see how it arises from the feeling of lack, see how it promises satisfaction, see how it fails to deliver, see how it creates suffering. And when you see that clearly, when you really see it, not as an idea, but as a lived reality, the craving loses its power, not because you are fighting it, but because you are no longer fooled by it. There is another story. A man is walking through a forest, and he sees a fruit tree. The fruit looks delicious. He is hungry. He reaches for the fruit. But as he reaches, someone says, "That fruit is poisoned." The man stops. He looks at the fruit. It still looks delicious. He still feels hungry, but he does not eat it. Not because he suppressed his desire, but because he saw clearly. He saw that eating the fruit would cause suffering, and that seeing was enough. He did not need to fight the desire. He just needed to see the truth. This is what Buddha means by right view. It is not a belief system. It is a way of seeing. It is seeing impermanence, seeing suffering, seeing no self, and seeing them not just as concepts, but as realities that are operating in every moment of your experience. When you see clearly, you act differently. Not because you should, not because it is moral, but because delusion has been replaced by clarity. The fruit is still there, the desire might still be there, but you do not reach for it,
because you see what it actually is. This is the third noble truth. Cessation is possible. Nirvana, the extinction of craving. And nirvana is not a place, it is not heaven, it is not an afterlife. Nirvana is the cessation of the process of becoming. It is what happens when craving stops.
When the mind stops reaching for the next thing, the next moment, the next experience, when the mind stops trying to be anything other than what it is, and in that stopping, there is peace. Not the peace of satisfaction, but the peace of not needing to be satisfied. The peace of being complete as you are, not because you have everything you want, but because you have stopped wanting everything. This is the heart of Buddha's psychology. Suffering does not come from external circumstances. Suffering comes from craving, and craving comes from ignorance, from not seeing things as they are. And when you see things as they are, when you see impermanence, see suffering, see no self, the craving stops. Not all at once, not forever, but in moments, in glimpses. And those glimpses are enough. They show you that freedom is possible, that the suffering you have been carrying is not inevitable, that it is created by a process, and that process can end. Buddha is standing in front of 1,000 ascetics. They are fire worshippers. They perform rituals with fire. They believe fire is sacred, purifying, divine. And Buddha looks at them and says, "Monks, all is burning." And what is burning? The I is burning. Forms are burning. I consciousness is burning. Eye contact is burning. Whatever feeling arises with eye contact, that too is burning. Burning with what? Burning with the fire of greed, the fire of hatred, the fire of delusion. Burning with birth, aging, and death, with sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair.
This word disenchanted is key. It does not mean cynical. It does not mean despairing. It means seeing through the enchantment, seeing through the spell that says if you can just get the right things, achieve the right goals, become the right person, you will finally be happy. The spell that says satisfaction is possible through sense pleasure, through becoming, through accumulation. And when you see through that spell, when you see that it is a lie, you become dispassionate, not cold, not unfeeling, but no longer driven by the fire of craving, no longer burning. And in that cessation of burning, there is liberation, nirvana, the blowing out of the flame, not the flame of life, but the flame of craving, the flame of the constant becoming. And what is left when the flame goes out is not nothing. What is left is what was always there beneath the burning, the peace that does not depend on getting what you want, the freedom that does not depend on circumstances, the completeness that does not depend on adding anything to what you are. There is a monk named Bahiya who approaches Buddha while Buddha is walking through a town on his alms round. Bahiya has been searching for enlightenment for years. He has heard that Buddha is the teacher. So he runs up to Buddha and begs, "Please teach me the Dharma, teach me the truth, I am ready." And Buddha says, "This is not the time, I am on my alms round." But Bahiya is insistent. He says, "Please, life is uncertain, death could come at any moment, teach me now." And Buddha stops. He looks at him, and he says, "Bahiya, train yourself thus. In the seen, there will be just the seen. In the heard, just the heard. In the sensed, just the sensed. In the cognized, just the cognized. When for you, Bahiya, in the seen there is just the seen, in the heard just the heard, in the sensed just the sensed, in the cognized just the cognized, then, Bahiya, you will not be by that.
When you are not by that, you will not be in that. When you are not in that, you will be neither here nor beyond nor in between the two. This, just this, is the end of suffering. And Bahiya stands there, and something in him understands. Not intellectually, not as a concept, but as a direct seeing. In the seen, just the seen. No seer, no self that owns the seeing, just the seeing itself. And in that moment, the fire goes out, the burning stops. Bahiya is enlightened, right there, in the middle of the street. And Buddha continues walking. This is the teaching. Not a long process, not years of practice, but a direct seeing. When you stop adding the self to experience, when you stop claiming ownership, when you stop turning experience into my experience, the suffering ends. Because the suffering was never in the experience, the suffering was in the claiming, in the identifying, in the constant movement of the mind that says this is mine, this is me, this is what I am. In the seen, just the seen. This is phenomenology. This is pure observation. This is what happens when you stop interpreting experience and just experience it. The eye sees forms. That is all. There is no seer, there is just seeing. The ear hears sounds. There is no hearer, there is just hearing. And when you realize that, when you see it directly, the entire structure of the separate self collapses. Because the separate self was only ever the claiming, the adding of me and mine to what was already complete without it. This is what the fire sermon is pointing toward. You are burning because you are constantly adding fuel to the fire. You are constantly feeding the flames with craving, with aversion, with delusion. And Buddha is saying, stop feeding the fire. Do not add anything. Do not claim anything. Just see. Just hear. Just sense. Just be present to what is, without the overlay of interpretation, without the movement of claiming, without the constant becoming. And when you stop adding fuel, the fire goes out. Not because you extinguished it, but because you stopped feeding it. There is a profound simplicity to this. The entire path, the entire teaching can be reduced to this. Stop adding yourself to experience. Just let experience be what it is. And when you do that, when you really do that, the suffering ends. Not because circumstances change, not because you get what you want, but because the mechanism that was creating suffering has stopped operating. But here is the difficulty. The mind does not want to stop adding itself. The mind wants to be someone. The mind wants to matter. The mind wants to claim, to own, to identify. And so, even when you hear this teaching, even when you understand it intellectually, the mind turns it into a project. The mind says, okay, I will stop adding myself. I will practice non-identification. I will become someone who does not claim ownership. And that is still the mind adding itself. That is still becoming. That is still the fire. So what do? Buddha's answer is you practice. You train. You develop mindfulness, the capacity to observe the mind without being caught in it. You watch the mind claiming. You watch the mind identifying. You watch the mind adding itself to experience. And in that watching, something shifts. The identification becomes transparent. You see it happening. And when you see it happening, you are no longer completely identified with it. There is a gap, a space. And in that space, there is freedom. This is why Buddha taught meditation. Not as a relaxation technique, not as stress management, but as a laboratory for observing the mind. You sit, you watch the breath, and the mind wanders. It gets lost in thought, it creates stories, it identifies with emotions, it claims ownership of sensations. And you notice. You bring the attention back, and the mind wanders again, and you notice again. And slowly, over time, you start to see the pattern. You start to see how the mind operates, how it creates the self moment by moment, how it adds itself to experience, how it turns the simple arising and passing of phenomena into my experience. And in that seeing, the fire starts to cool. Not because you are suppressing anything, but because you are no longer feeding it. You are no longer unconsciously adding fuel. You are seeing the mechanism, and the seeing itself is the beginning of liberation. The fire sermon ends with those 1,000 ascetics becoming enlightened, right there, in that moment, because they saw. They saw that they had been worshiping the very fire that was burning them. They saw that the problem was not external, it was internal. It was the craving, the constant becoming, the endless reaching for what was always just out of reach. And when they saw that, the fire went out. And what remained was peace. Not the peace of satisfaction, but the peace of no longer needing to be satisfied. This is what Buddha is offering. Not a better life, not a happier self, but the end of the fire, the cessation of the constant burning. And that cessation is available now, in this moment, if you are willing to stop adding fuel, if you are willing to see, if you are willing to let the fire go out. There is a question that haunts Buddhist teaching. If there is no self, if craving ends, if the fire goes out, what remains? Is it nothing? Is it annihilation? Is nirvana the same as death? And Buddha consistently refused to answer this question directly. He said it was one of the questions that leads nowhere, one of the questions that does not lead to liberation. But the reason he refused to answer is not because he did not know. It is because any answer he gave would be misunderstood. If he said nirvana is existence, people would cling to the idea of a permanent self that continues after enlightenment. If he said nirvana is non-existence, people would think it is annihilation, nothingness, and they would be terrified. If he said nirvana is both existence and non-existence, it would be contradictory. If he said nirvana is neither existence nor non-existence, it would be incomprehensible. So he remained silent. Or he pointed, he used metaphors, he told stories, but he did not define nirvana because nirvana is not a concept, it is not a state, it is not a thing. It is what remains when the concepts fall away. There's a monk named Vacchagotta who asks Buddha, where does the enlightened person go after death? Does he exist? Does he not exist? And Buddha says, Vacchagotta, when a fire goes out, where does it go? Does it go to the east, to the west, to the north, to the south? And Vacchagotta says that question does not apply. The fire goes out because the fuel is exhausted. It does not go anywhere. And Buddha says, in the same way, the enlightened person does not go anywhere. The fuel of craving is exhausted. The fire is out. And any description using concepts like existence or non-existence does not apply. This is profound. Buddha is saying nirvana is not a place. It is not a state of consciousness. It is not something you achieve or attain. It is what is already here when you stop adding the fuel of craving. The fire going out is not the end of experience. It is the end of the suffering that was created by the belief in a separate self that needs to be fed, protected, improved. Nirvana literally means blowing out or extinction, and what is extinguished is not you. What is extinguished is the illusion of you, the constructed self, the pattern of identification, the constant becoming. And when that is extinguished, what remains is just this, just experience, just phenomena arising and passing away, but without anyone claiming ownership of it, without anyone suffering because of it. There is a famous exchange between Buddha and a wandering ascetic named Upasiva. Upasiva asks, "The one who has reached the end, the one who is liberated, does he still exist, or does he not exist, or both, or neither?"
And Buddha says, "There is no measure by which one can say that the liberated one exists or does not exist. When all phenomena are removed, all ways of speaking are removed." This is not evasion. This is precision. Buddha is saying that the question assumes there is a thing, an entity, a person who either exists or does not exist. But the entire teaching is that there is no such entity. There is a process. There is a flow of experience. And when the process of claiming that experience as mine stops, language fails. Because language is built on the subject-object distinction. Language assumes there is a self and a world, and when that distinction dissolves, language has nothing to grab onto. This is why the mystical traditions, including Buddhism, often resort to paradox, to poetry, to silence, because they are trying to point towards something that cannot be said, something that can only be known through direct experience. And that something is not mystical in the sense of supernatural. It is mystical in the sense of being beyond conceptual grasp. But here is what can be said. What remains when the flame goes out is peace. Not the peace of getting what you want, not the peace of a quiet mind,
but the peace that comes from no longer being at war with reality, the peace that comes from accepting impermanence, the peace that comes from seeing through the illusion of the separate self, the peace that comes from no longer needing things to be different from what they are. There is a story about a monk who becomes enlightened and is asked, "What is different now?" And he says, "Nothing is different. I still eat, I still sleep, I still walk, I still talk. But before, I was doing all of these things as someone, as a self trying to become, trying to achieve, trying to get somewhere. And now there is just the eating, just the sleeping, just the walking. The claiming has stopped, and in that stopping, there is peace." This is what Buddha discovered under the tree, and this is what he tried to communicate for 45 years. That you are already free, that the prison you are in is not real, that the self you are defending does not exist, that the suffering you are experiencing is created by a process that can be seen through, and when it is seen through, the suffering ends, not because you have become someone who does not suffer, but because the one who was suffering has been seen to be a construction, a phantom, a story you were telling yourself.
And what remains when the story ends is not nothing. What remains is everything, the full, unmediated, unclaimed experience of being alive, the taste of food without the self that is tasting, the sensation of breathing without the breather, the arising and passing of thoughts without the thinker, the flow of life without someone trying to control it. This is what nirvana is. Not a reward, not an achievement, not a state to be attained, but the simple recognition of what has always been here, beneath the noise of the mind's constant becoming. Buddha's final words, according to the texts, were these: "All conditioned things are subject to decay. Strive on with diligence." He did not say, "I have saved you." He did not say, "Believe in me and you will be free." He said, "Everything conditioned is impermanent, so work out your own liberation. Do not take my word for it. Look for yourself, see for yourself, and when you see, you will be free." This is the gift of Buddhist teaching. It is not a set of beliefs to adopt. It is not a religion to follow. It is an invitation to investigate your own experience, to look at your own mind, to see how suffering is created, and to discover that the cessation of suffering is possible, not through faith, not through hope, but through direct seeing, through understanding, through the willingness to let go of what you thought you were and discover what you actually are.
The fire has been burning your entire life. You have been on fire with craving, with becoming, with the constant effort to be someone. And Buddha is saying you can let the fire go out, not by force, not by suppression, but by seeing, by understanding, by recognizing that the fuel you have been adding is not necessary, that you do not need to keep feeding the flames, that you can stop, that you can rest, that you can be what you are right now without needing to become anything else. And when the fire goes out, what remains is not emptiness. What remains is fullness, the fullness of presence, the fullness of experience unmediated by the constant claiming of the self, the fullness of life lived without the burden of constantly trying to protect, improve, or justify a self that was never solid to begin with. This is the end of the teaching. This is what Buddha discovered. This is what he offered, not as a belief, but as a possibility that is available to you now, in this moment, if you are willing to look, if you are willing to see, if you are willing to let the fire go out. The end of suffering is not the end of life, it is the beginning of living.